Everyone who has ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what it is made of and whether we are made of the same thing. The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan. Preface. This book began with a simple question that turned out to have no simple answer. Where does water come from? Not the water of a particular river or rain cloud, but water itself, the substance, the molecule, considered on the largest possible scale. The more I followed the question, the further back it led, past the oceans of Earth to the comets and asteroids that may have filled them, past those to the cold clouds between the stars where water is assembled atom by atom, and past even those to the stars themselves, which forge one of water's two ingredients in their cores and scatter it across space when they die. What began as a question about water became a question about stars, and then about planets, and finally about life. This book is the attempt to hold all of those together in a single view. The view I have tried to draw is what I call the cosmic water cycle, the idea that water moves in a great connected loop through the universe, from the stars to the clouds to the worlds and back again, and that in following it, we are following a thread that ties the chemistry of the stars to the chemistry of living things. That is a large claim, and I have tried to earn it slowly, building it from evidence rather than asserting it, and marking clearly where the evidence is strong, where it is suggestive, and where it runs out and interpretation begins. A word about how the book is written, because it shapes everything in it. This is a comparative and open-ended investigation, not an argument for a single doctrine. Where there are competing accounts, as there are, notably, about the nature of stars, I have tried to state each fairly in the form its own proponents would recognize before weighing it against the evidence. And throughout, I have tried to distinguish four kinds of source so that the reader can always tell what sort of claim is being made. Primary sources, the direct records of observation and measurement, scholarly sources, the peer-reviewed work of the scientific community, interpretive or speculative sources, reasoned extensions beyond the settled consensus, and 7. Controversial or fringe interpretations which I have neither hidden nor endorsed but examined and, where the evidence required, set aside. This grading is not a decoration. It is the method by which a book that takes unorthodox ideas seriously can still remain honest. I have written for the general educated reader, assuming no background in astronomy, and I have tried throughout for prose that is clear and patient rather than technical or sensational. The subject is astonishing enough on its own. It needs no inflation. If the book succeeds, the reader will come away not with a set of conclusions to be believed, but with a way of seeing, a sense of water and of themselves as part of a vast and continuous cosmic process, and a clearer feel for the difference between what we know, what we suspect, and what we have yet to discover. Trevor A. Toller, 8. Introduction, Water, Light, and the Living Body, on the work of Jerry Pollock. I stand on the warm sand at the edge of the ocean and watch the sun sink toward the horizon, turning the evening into a slow burn of gold, rose, and deepening blue. The air is soft and salt bright, carrying the hush of retreating waves, the faint cry of distant gulls, and the cool touch of a breeze that lifts the skin and seems to move through the body as much as over it. The sea answers the sky with a shimmering path of light, and for a moment everything feels joined. Water, wind, breath, and the pulse of the living world. In that stillness, with the horizon fading and the tide murmuring at my feet, it is impossible not to think of the body itself as another kind of shoreline, another watery landscape shaped by forces both seen and unseen. That thought leads naturally to the human body, which is made mostly of water in one form or another. By weight, an average adult is about 60% water, with water distributed through cells, tissues, blood, organs, and body fluids, while certain organs contain even more, such as the lungs at about 83%, the brain and heart at about 73%, and the muscles and kidneys at around 79%. Water is not merely present in life, it is woven through the living system itself. That alone should make us cautious about any theory that treats water as chemically inert or biologically secondary. The body's aqueous environment is not a uniform lake sitting passively behind the scenes. It is a layered, dynamic, electrically responsive medium in which molecules move, bonds form and break, reactions occur, and biological signals are carried forward. Water is the stage, but it is also part of the action. This is one reason Jerry Pollack's work has drawn so much attention. Pollack argues that water near hydrophilic surfaces can enter a distinct organized state, often described as exclusion zone water or structured water, and that this organized phase may play an important role in biology. In his framework, water is not just the medium of life, but an active nine, participant in life's energetic architecture, especially where light and surfaces interact. Pollack's central claim is simple enough to state, though not simple to prove. Water behaves differently near certain surfaces than it does in bulk, and those differences may be biologically consequential. The exclusion zone, or EZ, is the name he gives to a region adjacent to hydrophilic surfaces where microscopic particles are repelled, suggesting a structured layer of water with properties that differ from ordinary bulk water. Over time, this idea has expanded into a broader vision in which light, charge separation, surface chemistry, and water ordering form a unified picture of how biological systems organize themselves. A fair introduction should also note that this is still controversial. Reviews of the exclusion zone literature acknowledge that the phenomenon has been observed by multiple groups, but they also argue that conventional mechanisms such as diffusiophoresis, surface effects, dissolved solutes, and nanobubbles may explain some of the results without requiring a fundamentally new phase of water. In other words, Pollack's work is intriguing because it may point towards something real, but it remains unresolved in the eyes of many researchers. Still, even skeptics generally concede that water near surfaces can behave differently from water in the bulk. That matters because biology is full of surfaces, membranes, proteins, channels, DNA, cytoskeletal structures, organelles, and extracellular matrices all create interfaces where water is likely to be organized in ways that matter. Pollack's contribution is to insist that these interfacial behaviors may not be a side issue at all, but a central feature of life's physical organization. If we want to understand why this debate matters, we have to begin with the body itself. The human organism is not built around dry matter with a little water added for convenience. It is an aqueous system from the start. Total body water in an average adult is about 60% by weight, though that number varies with age, sex, body composition, and hydration status. Lean tissue contains more water than fatty tissue, and many organs, 10, are especially rich in it. The lungs are about 83% water, the brain and heart about 73%, and muscles and kidneys around 79%. That is why water is so important in physiology. Blood depends on it, lymph depends on it, intracellular chemistry depends on it, extracellular signaling depends on it. Even the solidity of bone does not exclude water. The mineral matrix is interwoven with fluid and hydration at microscopic levels. The body is not merely wet. It is organized through water. This is one reason Pollock's ideas resonate with readers who are looking for a deeper, unifying principle. If water already permeates the body so extensively, then it is reasonable to ask whether its organization matters more than standard descriptions suggest. Not every such question leads to a new theory, but some do. Pollock's work is compelling precisely because it asks whether the watery fabric of the body is more structured, more electrically active, and more responsive to light than mainstream accounts have traditionally emphasized. Standard biochemistry already gives water a much more active role than casual language implies. One of the clearest examples is the hydration shell. When ions or polar molecules enter water, surrounding molecules orient themselves in response to charge, forming structured layers around the solute. These shells influence how ions dissolve, move, interact, and react. They are not decorative, they are part of the mechanism. This matters throughout physiology because the body is full of charged particles. Sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, magnesium, and countless biomolecules behave differently depending on how they are hydrated. A protein's behavior, an enzyme's efficiency, or a receptor's function can change dramatically depending on the water around it. In this sense, water is already part of the body's structural blueprint because it helps determine how molecular shape and molecular motion fit together. Hydration is also central to the chemistry of life. Chemical reactants in cells do not simply bump into one another in a neutral space. They encounter a constantly shifting aqueous environment that influences reactivity, binding, diffusion, and electrostatic behavior. ATP production, protein folding, enzyme catalysis, and membrane transport all depend on 11. This environment, water, is not an accessory to metabolism. It is one of the conditions that makes metabolism possible. Water's role becomes even more striking when we look at proton transfer. In many biological settings, protons do not move like tiny billiard balls through empty space. Instead, they move through hydrogen bond networks in water, often described as proton wires or proton hopping pathways. That means water can serve as a conduit for charge movement and signaling, not merely as a solvent around the real action. Ion channels provide another example. Standard models often focus on protein movement, but recent reviews emphasize that water and protons may be deeply involved in channel gating, including voltage-gated potassium channels such as Kv1.2. The confined water inside or near channel pores can influence selectivity, conductance, and the opening and closing behavior of the channel. In other words, water is not just surrounding the machinery. In some cases, it is part of the machinery. This is one of the strongest bridges between conventional biophysics and Pollock-style thinking. The standard literature already recognizes that water in cramped biological spaces can behave in unusual, functionally significant ways. Pollock goes further by suggesting that organized interfacial water may be more general, more stable, and more biologically important than the standard framework fully admits. Whether or not that broader claim proves correct, the basic premise that water participates in biological information flow is already well grounded in mainstream science. The phrase structured water has become controversial because it is used in many different ways. In a modest scientific sense, it can refer to water whose local arrangement differs near a surface, solute, membrane, or macromolecule. In a stronger sense, it can imply a distinct phase of water with unusual properties and biological effects. Pollock's work is associated with the stronger version of the claim, especially through his concept of exclusion zone water. Supporters of this view argue that structured water may explain phenomena that standard bulk water models do not fully capture. They point to experimental observations of exclusion zones, charge separation, 12, and other signs that water near hydrophilic surfaces behaves in a special way, Critics respond that some of these effects may be produced by more ordinary mechanisms, including surface charge, solute gradients, and particle motion in response to concentration differences. Both sides agree that there is interesting physics at interfaces. They disagree about what it means. A careful introduction should preserve that distinction. It would be misleading to state as settled fact that water in the body exists widely as a fully distinct fourth phase. It would also be misleading to reduce all interfacial water behavior to trivial chemistry. The more honest position is that water's organization near surfaces is real, important, and still incompletely understood. That leaves room for Pollack's ideas without forcing the evidence farther than it can go. Water memory belongs in the same category of unresolved claims. The basic idea is that water can somehow retain a signature of substances, influences, or information after the original material is no longer present. This notion has long captured the imagination because it suggests that water may do more than participate in reactions. It may retain traces of experience. The mainstream scientific response, however, remains skeptical. Recent summaries state plainly that there is no convincing empirical evidence that water retains memory in the strong sense often claimed, and earlier water memory experiments have been criticized for lacking reproducibility and rigorous controls. That does not make the topic unworthy of discussion, but it does mean the claim should be presented as hypothesis and controversy, not established fact. Still, the water memory idea persists because it highlights a real question about history and structure in aqueous systems. Water can certainly hold temporary patterns, especially near interfaces in hydrogen bond networks or in constrained biological spaces. The open question is how far that extends, how long it lasts, and whether it has biological significance. That is a more restrained version of the question, and it is one that science is still capable of exploring. 13. One of the most distinctive features of Pollack's writing is his emphasis on light. He argues that radiant energy, especially infrared light, may help drive the organization of exclusion zone water and support the separation of charge associated with it. This gives water a place not only in chemistry and physiology, but in the energetic relationship between life and the environment. That idea fits naturally with the fact that sunlight powers much of life on Earth. Plants, weather systems, the global water cycle, and biological rhythms all depend on solar input. Water evaporates, condenses, flows, freezes, thaws, and circulates under the influence of heat and light. In that sense, water is already part of the solar economy of the planet. Pollack's work invites us to ask whether that same relationship between light and water extends inward into tissues and cells, where microscopic aqueous systems may also be organized by energy gradients and radiant exposure. The best way to read Pollack is neither as a crank nor as a final answer, but as a provocateur of useful questions. His experiments and interpretations have forced attention back onto a substance that mainstream science already knows is extraordinary, even if it does not fully agree with his conclusions. Water is central to life, and the exact way it participates in life remains an active field of inquiry. Mainstream biophysics explains much of what water does through hydration shells, proton transfer, electrostatics, membrane chemistry, and solvent dynamics. Pollack's work asks whether those models are incomplete, especially at surfaces where light, charge, and organization intersect. Water memory is the most speculative part of this larger discussion, and it should be treated with particular caution. But the broader question, whether water can support more order than we usually assume, is legitimate and important. This introduction therefore begins with a simple fact and ends with a large question. The simple fact is that the human body is largely water, and that water is distributed through every level of biology, from molecules and membranes to tissues and organs. The large question is whether that water is doing more than standard models currently recognize, especially when at 14 is organized at surfaces shaped by light and linked to the dynamics of energy transfer. Jerry Pollack's work matters because it keeps that question alive. It does not settle the issue, and it should not be presented as though it has. But it does help readers see water as something richer than a neutral fluid. Whether one emphasizes hydration shells, proton wires, ion channels, ATP chemistry, or the possibility of structured interfacial water, the deeper theme is the same. Life is not merely wet, it is water organized into meaning. We enter the world through water, live by water, and are sustained by it at every stage of the journey. We begin in the amniotic ocean of the womb, spend our lives drinking water, bathing in it, and carrying it in blood, cells, and tissues, until at last our bodies return their moisture to the greater world. Water is the body's great solvent, the medium in which substances dissolve, circulate, and transform, and it also takes part in the long natural breaking down of the body after death, as complex structures yield to chemical and biological processes of decomposition. In that sense, water does not simply sustain life, it also helps return life to the larger order from which it came. The same logic extends outward to the sky. The sun drives the water cycle that lifts oceans into clouds, returns rain to the land, and keeps life in motion, while the stars, long before it forged the elements that made water possible at all. What we carry in our bodies is therefore not separate from the cosmos, but part of a larger continuity of transformation, from stellar birth to earthly water, from bodily life to natural dissolution, and from dissolution back into the elemental currents of the universe. If we are to trace this story back far enough, we must begin with the sun and with the long stellar history that made water possible. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and oxygen was forged in stars and dispersed by their lives and deaths. When those elements came together under the right conditions, water became possible, and later life itself became possible.